This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
The original Justice League has become a memory.
I am resigning from the Justice League.
What's going to happen to the League now?
We rebuild. From the ashes of that great conflict, a new team has arisen. A much, much bigger team.
Each of you brings something different to the table.
Old friends, new heroes. And as usual, plenty of bad guys jumping up to get beat down.
Calm down, and I'll let you go.
How about you kiss my ass?
Watch out, evildoers. There's nowhere to run. Because this year, they're all around you. The League is unlimited. An all-new original series starring every superhero worth cheering for. And then some. Justice League Unlimited.
Where am I exactly?
Among friends.
There's strength in numbers.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 253 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is Cal. Cal, we are finishing up our latest month of Justice League and JLU reviews, and my goodness, do we have just an absolute corker here to finish off the month, an absolute stone cold classic, as they might say, with this week's episode, as we delve deeper and deeper into this Cadmus arc.
That is right, Liam, and boy. It's we are in the home stretch here, believe it or not, with the Cadmus arc. It's started off quite a while ago on the episodes that we've covered, probably at least over a year timeline wise, if not 2 years. So we are in the home stretch here, and it is boy, things are ramping up, and boy, what a cliffhanger we have with this one. It is the episode, of course, Question Authority is what we are discussing today. And we talked about last week. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, highly encourage you to go back and listen to it in the archives, whether at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app or the Pod Tower on YouTube. But wherever you listen to your podcasts, check out that episode if you didn't, because, man, we had so much fun talking about what an incredibly well-written episode it was, and the layers of commentary and application that can be had with everything that went into that episode. And I believe we'll probably have as much, if not more, to talk about this week as we talk about the additional layers and just tremendous writing. I mean, how many home runs can one guy hit? Dwayne McDuffie, the late great Dwayne McDuffie, man, he was his pen, that gif of the guy writing and his pen is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's exactly what was happening to Dwayne McDuffie right here. Like, this is definitely the pen on fire meme. Like, just absolutely burner after burner.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into this episode, Question Authority, today. Can't wait to do so. But first, of course, Cal, we must get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode. And that synopsis is brought to you by the Pod Tower YouTube channel, where you can hear not only our DCAU episode reviews, as well as comic books in every episode that we do, but you can also hear content from the Watchtower database, as well as the archives of the Tim Talk show as well. So lots of great content up there on the Pod Tower YouTube channel. And without any further ado, Cal, it's time for the official IMDb synopsis. That is right after you hit us with that air date.
That is right, Liam. This original air date for this episode here in the States was on the Cartoon Network. Boy, I miss you, Cartoon Network. Back on June the 25th, 2005, meaning once again, we are getting ready to come up on the 18-year anniversary of this episode's debut on broadcast television.
Absolutely. So this is the synopsis for Question Authority, which was written by Dwayne McDuffie, directed by Dan Reba, with music by the Dynamic Music Partners and animation by Dong Wu. And that synopsis reads as such. The Question, fearing disaster, decides to kill Lex Luthor to avert it. Well,
I mean, they didn't do much to discuss the actual plot there, so I don't know how much of a plot synopsis that is. That it's certainly something that happens within the plot, but I don't think that it is a well-rounded synopsis. But I guess it would probably get like maybe like a C-, D+, because it does cover something that happens. It's not infactual. It's not something for a different episode as we've had in the past, but it really doesn't. It's bare minimum. It doesn't do not a lot of effort put into that one.
Totally agree. So yeah, it does cover one of the big plot points, but not in enough detail for our satisfaction. So once again, IMDb synopsis writer, please see us after class. But without further ado, we will get started with our brief plot synopsis as we give our thoughts here. And it's a fun kind of cold open to this episode. We have one of the new gods, or one of the apocalypse characters that we somehow have never seen, with all this fourth world stuff that they had gotten into between Superman and Justice League and JLU. We had never gotten the character Mantis on screen before, and we see him just wrecking shop as in Metropolis, as we see Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen looking on, and Superman and Captain Atom show up to save the day. And after a fight, which I'm sure we'll talk more about in visuals, Cal, they are just able to defeat Mantis thanks to Captain Atom and Superman's quick thinking as they activate Mantis's boom tube and send him tunneling through the wormhole, but of course hold on to the mother box so that he can't come back. And as Captain Atom and Superman are kind of commiserating over the situation, we see Lois Lane literally sliding into frame, sliding down the wreckage and
sliding into Superman's DMs.
That's right. As
I think we should clip that out. That needs to go on the social media this week. Sliding into the DMs, and
yes.
Lois sliding down the escalator railing.
Absolutely, I love that. But yes, we have Lois sort of. It seems like she's there in her official capacity as reporter, but very quickly it's made to be clear that Captain Atom is a bit of a third wheel to this conversation, as clearly Lois and Superman have made other plans, and so Captain Atom excuses himself as Superman and Lois make a bit of small talk before flying off to go on their date.
Superman! Lois Lane, Daily Planet.
Yeah, Lois, I know.
Would you care to comment on what just happened here? I'd like an interview. One-on-one.
I'm pretty sure there's something I have to do someplace.
You're late.
I was busy.
Like I wasn't. But I've already written the story up and filed it, so now that we're both off the clock.
Captain Adams. Captain Nathaniel Adams.
General Eiling, sir. What brings you to... What's this?
Orders. Your commission has been reactivated. You're back in the Air Force.
I'm committed to the Justice League now, sir.
You also made a commitment to the service, Captain. Seems to me you've got a decision to make.
And we cut to see Captain Atom flying off, having saved the day, but then we hear a voice calling out to him, and it's none other than the returning General Eiling, who has an interesting proposal for him, as he tells him that they are reinstating him into the U.S. Air Force, which of course he had to leave after the experiment that turned him into Captain Atom. So they're sort of, as we'll come to find out, they're sort of playing on the deep patriotism and pride that the Captain Atom takes in on his service, and that's kind of our time being cliffhanger is as Eiling hands him his papers and tells him he's got a decision to make. Does he want to be with the Justice League or come back and join the side of the angels, quote unquote, with the U.S. Air Force reinstating him? So thereafter, our credit sequence, we have Superman and Lois on a picnic on the top of a bridge, as he rolls out his her food, which I just love the food. It's like a turkey leg and some grapes and orange soda. Like what?
And celery. He's got celery there too. I was like, is this typical like Kansas food? You turkey legs, grapes, and celery with orange soda.
Yeah, and I'm not personally familiar, but hey, maybe that was Sunday dinner every week in Smallville.
Like, belongs on the Boys Who Can Cook like Instagram account. Like the Superman got his recipes from there, I think.
But yes, and as they begin to sort of discuss things, Lois points out kind of the elephant in the room, which is that Superman and by extension the Justice League are experiencing quite a bit of bad press recently, and you can tell from Lois's tone that it's not really all undeserved in her eyes.
Yeah, she goes so far as to say is not only is their behavior, she mentions, of course, the fight between Superman and Captain Marvel, which of course we discussed last week, and the destruction of Lexor City on national television. She also happens to mention the use of the Watchtower as a super laser to destroy what were those robot things called?
The Darkheart.
Darkheart, that's right. When they turned the robots on the Darkheart in the desert. She mentions that and mentions that people are very scary, or a little bit scared of the Justice League, and that the way that they've been throwing their power around is a little bit concerning to even her. And Superman very sternly but kindly says that, well, we're just doing what's best. We're just making sure that people are safe. And boy, if that doesn't sound like some politician speaking. And and Lois figures that out right away, that sounds awfully familiar, and she points out to Superman that it sounds a little bit like something that Lex would say.
You remember what happened to your reputation when you were under Darkseid's control.
That was years ago.
People haven't forgotten. Not everybody.
I know.
Do you? The way you and the League have been acting lately. Look, I'm a reporter, not a public relations person, but with all the muscle you guys throw around, you're starting to scare me.
I'll admit, we got a lot of power, but we only use it to help.
Like when you and Captain Marvel wrecked Lexor City on national television? Or maybe you mean when you fired that big space gun in the desert?
We come on a little strong sometimes, but it's for the people's own good.
That sounds like something Lex would say.
Don't even joke about that. I'm nothing like Lex Luthor.
Of course you're not. I'm just saying you can't serve the public without their confidence. It's a question of trust. So, what's for dessert?
That's right. And we should also mention here, I think, that she also reminds Superman and the audience, by extension, of the events of Legacy, the series finale of Superman, where he was mind controlled and nearly took over the planet with an apocalyptic army, and mentions that's not something that people have forgotten, which we will see in uncertain terms later in the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not even that's no minor point there. Is obviously that's where a lot of people began to question the authority, so to speak. Hey, that's the name of the episode. So Superman is willing to sort of to admit and that the Justice League has been coming on a little bit strong recently, but again, he reassures her that it's for the public's own safety. And despite these objections, and Superman does take offense a little bit to her comment about Lex, and again reiterates he's nothing like Lex, and Lois also recognizes that she's just showing concern for him, and they have a romantic kiss, and that's kind of where we leave them at that point. And we cut over to another DCAU couple, probably my favorite couple from the DCAU, that being the Huntress and the Question, as they themselves are also on a sort of a date, as we see the Question sitting at a computer attempting to download some media to a hard drive. And in the background, while this is happening, we have the Huntress that is there with him, supporting him, despite, again, as a reminder to the audience and everyone, that she has been removed from the Justice League. She's no longer a member of the Justice League. She's there supporting the Question. You gotta support your romantic partner. You gotta support them in all their endeavors, even if that means breaking into a high-tech secret government facility to steal their information, right? You gotta stand by your man, as the song goes. But the Huntress, as she's taking care of the security guards, we recognize, and the Question acknowledges that the true reason he's there is because he believes he's finally found the connection between Lex Luthor and Project Cadmus, which, if you recall, Batman actually tasked him back a few episodes back with that task to find out the connection between the two of them, and he believes he's stumbled upon it with this information that he's grabbed. And so as they're leaving, I love this too, Huntress absconds with the information, demanding that before he reviews any data, that they actually have an actual formal no just beating up security guards while he reviews the data.
You get what you came for?
I believe so. If there's a link between Luthor and Cadmus, I'll find it here.
Which leaves the rest of our evening tantalizingly free.
There are 3 terabytes of data here. I'll be busy for days. Oh, dinner and a movie?
It's a start.
So much comedy happening.
I was gonna say, that's one of the things that I think maybe coming back to this I had kind of forgotten, which is that as serious and as heady as this episode is, as far as like the topics at hand, there's some really, really cool and sweet like character moments between Huntress and Question in this episode, and how much she very clearly cares for him in this episode, and how they have this very kind of quirky and maybe a bit dysfunctional relationship, but that they clearly do. They're clearly made for each other.
I wholeheartedly agree. And as we cut to our next scene, Lex is actually at Cadmus, and he's there with Professor Lime Hamilton, as we covered him last week. Emil Hamilton's evil twin brother Lime. Professor Lime is doing a physical with Lex, and there's a bit of some dialogue where we learn that Lex is no longer stricken with cancer, as we had learned back in the Justice League episode Injustice for All, leading to his ultimate demise as like the businessman and full-blown supervillain. And the reason for the whole green suit thing was designed to keep the cancer from spreading. It was a very Iron Man-esque style like reason for him to have the armor. It's keeping him alive. But Professor Lime tells him, go ahead, take that silly armor off. You no longer need it. Not only do you no longer need it, the cancer is gone, but you have the body of a 20-year-old, he says, which is super creepy. That Professor Lime, very, very creepy. So we get a little foreshadowing there, not much touched on as to the reason why. Lex is taken aback, not sure. But before we can get too many answers or delve into it any further, of course, we have someone interrupting the whole scene, which of course is Amanda Waller, who is there to inform not only Lex, but I guess also Professor Lime of the theft that occurred from Cadmus, that may indeed, in fact, implicate Lex and Cadmus being in cahoots together. She mentions that the IT department was unable to determine what information, but they have to believe that it's everything. The jig is up, so to speak. So we cut back to the Question, who is I guess he's had his formal date with Huntress, but he's back in full costume. He's back in full gear, and he's there. He's there, kind of going over the data. He's cracked it, and begins reviewing some of the files. And one of the files that he looks at happens to be something that will kind of set him down this path that is going to forever change his outlook on things and really set us on our course for the rest of the episode.
Absolutely. So yeah, we don't immediately see what it is, but we see that he's cracked. So he goes through a list. There's some fun little Easter eggs among those things, including as he's going through the files, he sees one specifically called President Luthor, and we see that very quickly that it's basically the idea of it being a what if scenario of how the intelligence community, Cadmus in this case, sees it going down if Lex were to win the presidency. And some of the highlights include Casnia Crisis. One of the other ones is Flashpoint 23, which turns out the 23rd episode jail called Flashpoint. So that's kind of a fun little side bit there. And then we have something interesting that I thought under a presidential campaign run by a billionaire: voter fraud in all caps. Interesting. No real world parallels to that.
Remember what we said, this aired in 2005, folks. 2005, folks.
That's right. So and there's a couple other little sort of maybe references, like Brazil Boys. I'm reading directly from the DCA wiki here, but which could be a reference to the novel Boys from Brazil, which deals with conspiracy to clone Hitler.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, sure, why not? There's a Isher Shop, which is perhaps a reference to the weapons shops of Isher, which is a novel, and the principal theme there being the rights to bear arms. And then there's one called Zarathustra, which may or may not be a reference to the comic book character of Miracle Man. So some fun Easter eggs. But as he's going down the file list, he sees one called Oval Office, and we don't quite see what he sees, but we see that it disturbs him quite a bit. And then we sort of cut to a couple of days later. He's sort of still sitting there. His hair's all disheveled, and he's quickly become convinced that it's not an alternate reality, this Justice Lord's world, but it in fact may be a time loop where no matter the Earth they're on, this is just predestined to happen.
It's all connected. Not alternate reality. Time loop. Luthor becomes president. Flash is killed. Superman kills Luthor in retaliation. Superhuman arms race. Armageddon. End of the world. Inevitable. Is the future immutable? Can destiny be changed? Will they allow it?
Screening your calls? You haven't answered the phone for days. Oh, it's rank in here. Is that you?
Have to try. Alternative unthinkable.
Q? Are you all right?
Have to go. Can't let it happen again.
There are at least 6 different ways I can stop you right now.
But they all involve deadly force, don't they? And you don't do that. No, you need me. You wouldn't be much of a hero without a villain. And you do love being a hero, don't you? The cheering children, the swooning women. You love it so much, it's made you my most reliable accomplice.
Accomplice? What do you...
You could have crushed me any time you wanted. And it wasn't the law or the will of the people that stopped you. It was your ego. Being a hero was too important to you. You're as much responsible for this as I am. So go ahead, fix it somehow, put me on trial, lock me up, but I'll beat it. And then we'll start the whole thing all over again.
I did love being a hero, but if this is where it leads, I'm done with it.
Oh my.
And as he's trying to think of a way that he could potentially upend this inevitable future, Huntress comes in and sort of tries to reason with him, tries to get him to calm down, but he rushes out the door. And then we see Huntress look at what he was looking at on the computer, and we actually see this sort of, I guess, AI created scenario. And we hear the audio of the opening scene from A Better World Part 1, as we hear Superman confront in the overall Luthor, taunt him, and then we see Superman's eyes glowing red. So we know now that they are aware of exactly what happened on that other Earth and what they think could happen here were Lex to win the presidency. So then we cut to the Watchtower where the question confronts Superman. And
something I can help you with?
I hope so. But I assume you don't want to discuss your White House weenie roast in front of a crowd.
I'll be back in a few minutes.
Always wondered what was in here. Private conference room. Original members only, yes? A place where you're free to discuss your secrets and lies.
You said something about me in the White House.
Not you exactly. Another version of you.
Stop dancing around it. Tell me what you know.
I know what you told everyone. The Justice Lords, a parallel universe version of the Justice League, came to our world to rid it of crime just as they did on their own world. With Lex Luthor's help, our Justice League managed to rout them before they could impose their totalitarian will on our populace. I also know what you didn't tell anyone outside of the original 7 members of the Justice League. On that other Earth, so very much like our own, a Superman so very much like you killed the president.
Question. No one can know about this.
Or what? You'll incinerate me too?
I'd never do anything like that.
Wouldn't you? Didn't you recently try to lobotomize Doomsday with your heat vision, just as the Justice Lord did?
That's different.
It's the same. A heavily armed watchtower with an army of proactive heroes. Luthor running for president. If it's not quite the same, it soon will be.
Hey, we asked last week what the name of this conference room was, and it's the private conference room, apparently.
That's right. They don't have their logos painted on the back, but it is the Justice League conference room here. And the question sort of lays out his theory that in order to get this pardon for Lex Luthor at the end of the events of the Justice Lords two-parter, Superman had to explain to the U.S. government what happened on this other Earth, and that sort of got the ball rolling where Cadmus felt they needed to figure out what was going on and he could do to defend the world were Superman to take similar steps in the main universe here. And Question mentions that all of their scenarios, all of their sort of war game analysis leads them to believe that it would in fact be so devastating that it could quite literally cause Armageddon. And Superman is very defensive and refuses to acknowledge that there's even a chance that this could happen. At which point Question sort of begins to throw some of these actions that Superman has taken in these other Cadmus episodes as of late. He asks him about trying to lobotomize Doomsday. He asks him about all of these things, and when Superman tries to tell him, well, we would never fight the government, he asks him, what if Luthor was the government? and Superman almost doesn't have an answer for it, and Question begins to spiral once again, and Superman tries to comfort him, but that kind of only makes him more paranoid, and he sort of leaves in a rush, even as Superman tries to quell his fears and tell him that those things that you're afraid of won't happen because I won't let them. And so Question, without really saying anything else, decides to leave. And we get to what I think is maybe the most like shocking scene in the history of the DC at this point, which is the Question. We cut back to Lex at LexCorp, and the Question is sitting at his desk, and as they begin to discuss things about Lex looking like he's going to be the next president, and how this will undoubtedly cause this Armageddon, and that it's a time loop. A is A, and Luthor is Luthor, no matter what dimension he's in. The Question begins to undo his tie, and it becomes pretty clearly there that this is not a heart-to-heart. He was not trying to. The Question did not come here to speak to Lex Luthor.
Have you seen the latest poll? It's beginning to look like you're going to be our next president. just like in that other world.
I wouldn't bet against me.
No, it wouldn't be prudent. I want you to understand something, Luthor. Although my distaste for you as a human being is Brobdingnagian, what I'm about to do isn't personal.
What are you babbling about?
Everything that exists has a specific nature. Each entity exists as something in particular and has characteristics that are part of what it is. A is A. And no matter what reality he calls home, Luthor is Luthor. If I'm to save the world, your existence must come to an end before you take office.
You're going to kill me so that Superman can't.
I'm a well-known crackpot. The Justice League's reputation will survive my actions, and Superman's legacy will remain intact.
Interesting plan. Unfortunately for you, it's not really an option.
Yep, he's there to kill him, and he says as much. He's going to end his life, and he's going to do so based on the fact that if he kills Luthor, then Superman can't kill Luthor. So, of course, the question one step ahead of Lex, says that the Justice League will certainly survive. Their reputation will survive him because he's a known crackpot assassinating Lex Luthor. So we will say that after he talks about how Luthor's presidency is almost a sure thing, Luthor does scoff and mention how much power he'd have to give up in order to become president. Mm-hmm. And that's really not what he's interested in. That there's a much bigger plan at play here. But as the question steps closer to Lex, as it looks like he's going to do what he has to do to get rid of him, Luthor picks him up by the throat and hurls him across the office into the...
I think he backhands him first. He backhands.
Oh, you're right. He does
into the tank, into the shark tank.
It's as if he has Superman's strength coming through him. It's very, very strange. It's not really explained. He then goes over and picks him up by the throat, and we get further fisticuffs, Luthor beating the tar out of him, and we get we kind of see him throw him across the room back through Lex's desk. So he's showing some superhuman strength here without any real explanation as to what is going on.
Yeah, it seems that it's a surprise to Lex as well. We can maybe talk more about this in visuals, but he's sort of staring at his hands and sort of got this sort of surprised but excited look on his face as he's just laying into the question here.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the after beating him senseless, he then sort of says that they're going to need to find out just exactly what he knows from the information that he stole from them. So we then get a scene where the question wakes up, and he's being tortured by this Dr. Moon, who interestingly enough was a stand-in. This is into the quote unquote bat embargo that may or may not have existed at this point. So if you remember, when Cadmus was first introduced, we had Hugo Strange on this panel, I believe. So I believe there were some comments from maybe Mr. McDuffie or Bruce Timm that said that this Dr. Moon was the stand-in because they weren't really allowed to use the Batman villains anymore. So Dr. Moon is there, and Dr. Moon does a pretty good job standing in for Hugo Strange as he begins his torture of the question and asking him just exactly what he knows. There's this sort of electroshock therapy, all these tubes hooked up to the question as he shocks him, and he has these horrible like hematoma, like blood spots all over his body. It's pretty disturbing looking, and we'll talk about that probably more in visuals, the actual torture scene. But the question, like a good soldier, refuses to give up what information he has, and instead just keeps blurting out these conspiracy theories. So the doctor asks him, "What do you know?" And then he just shares a random conspiracy theory. We go right down the line where he talks about fluoride, aglets, and then the magic bullet. So we have
the Illuminati. So.
Yeah, and the Illuminati. That's right. Yes, the Illuminati as well gets a mention there.
You stole files from our computer. Just tell me what you've learned.
Topically applied fluoride doesn't prevent tooth decay. It does render teeth detectable by spy satellite.
Tell me what you know.
The plastic tips at the ends of shoelaces are called aglets. Their true purpose is sinister.
Tell me what you know.
There was a magic bullet. It was forged by Illuminati mystics to prevent us from learning the truth.
Have it your way. This will continue until I break you. Perhaps even afterwards.
So he's refusing to give up the information, but we cut back at this point to Superman, who's out flying, and all of a sudden he happens to hear a familiar sound, which is the high-pitched frequency of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen's watch.
This episode forcing us to add Superman's pal to the rewatchability. To the must rewatches, because the entire second half of this episode is hinging on Jimmy Olsen's signal watch, surprisingly.
Thank Dwayne McDuffie for that one. So the Huntress, we learn, has stolen Jimmy's watch and taken that creep and tied him up and stolen his watch.
He likes it. You know he likes it.
Don't worry, though. Jimmy's quite all right as he sits there. And the Huntress just needed to get Superman's attention to let him know that the question has gone missing. They haven't seen him. Superman tries to reach him on the Justice League comlink and notes that the comlink is open but can't locate him. He offers Jean's help to find him. Jean is able to locate him, or at least where his comlink is, which is at some dump. And they go there. Huntress, fearing the worst, begins to dig through the rubble, but Superman assures her that she won't find the question there because there wouldn't make any sense for them to dump the comlink if they had already killed him. They must have taken him alive. So Huntress says, well, we got to go after him. And Superman says, we know where he is. We've kept tabs on Cadmus. We know where they are, but we can only go in lawfully and when there's enough evidence to support it. And Huntress reminds him that she's no longer, that's why she quit the Justice League, she says. And Superman reminds her that she didn't quit the Justice League. She was fired from the Justice League. So a little gotcha on that one. But Superman does relent and decide that they're going to go to Cadmus in order to find the question, but promises to do so off the books, sort of. So it's not an official Justice League mission, I guess. I don't know what that means. Like we talked about last week about how he represents, he's a symbol and he's a hero and all this stuff, but he's going and doing something off the books. Like he's not wearing like a mask or anything.
I was going to say he should have gotten like a tactical. He should have put on the deep sea dive Superman wetsuit.
Or like the green Doomsday suit from the comics in the mid 90s, like that green Kryptonian containment suit. Yeah, put that one on with the mask. But no, he just arrives at Cadmus and knocks down the door and takes on a whole army of Cadmus agents. But as he is scanning the rooms for wherever the location of the question is, he spots a familiar individual and decides he needs to pay him a visit, leaving the Huntress to take on the entire army of Cadmus agents herself, but she seems to be okay with handling it. She's quite formidable with her staff. They're lucky she didn't use her crossbow on just decided to do some fisticuffs on this one. Superman must have set the rules up ahead of time. But Superman's little detour is in fact a conversation with the aforementioned Dr. Lime Hamilton, and he begins to shake him down. And this is a very interesting. This is Dr. Lime's official heel turn, right? This is where we already knew he was aligned with Cadmus, but this is where he really breaks things down for Superman as to why he's working with Cadmus.
A lot of things are starting to make sense now, Professor Hamilton. When did Cadmus recruit you?
Recruit me? I went to them.
How can you work for these people? Do you know what they are?
Power brokers, politicians, criminals, and black ops mercenaries with one thing in common besides. They're humanity's last hope against your kind.
what are you talking about? Humanity doesn't need protection from us.
I used to believe that. I thought you were a guardian angel, come to answer our prayers. But Lucifer was an angel too, wasn't he?
Professor.
You forget, I'd been on the receiving end of your wrath when you brought Supergirl to Star Labs for medical treatment. I know what you're capable of.
That's what this is about? One little scare and you betray us? You stole Kara's DNA, violated her trust, my trust.
The chicken or the egg, Superman?
I love the line that he says that, you know, that he thought that Superman was a guardian angel, but then he remembered that Lucifer was an angel once too. And that cuts Superman, they cut to Superman's face, and you can see that, like, the anger rising in him. You know, he really holds the incident where Superman brought Supergirl to him in that episode Legacy that we talked about, which you can hear our review of in the archives. And he really holds that whole scenario against Superman, and that really turned the tides on his opinion of who Superman was. So
that's right. And I will just make a note here. I just had a memory of a conversation. I don't know if it was directly with us on Twitter or with perhaps our friends at Watchtower Database, but we were talking about something else related to a James Tucker storyboard that kind of changed something. I believe it was Curare's look when she does the mask on, and how he sort of boarded Terry being like shocked and appalled when the mask came off, and that maybe changed that character a little bit. And then he mentioned that he also in Legacy boarded, there's like one shot, you can go back to that episode where after Superman like grabs him by the lapels and slams him against the wall, when he drops him down and, you know, says, please help Supergirl, please help Kara, you know, I'm begging you. There's just one little shot of Hamilton looking like terrified and so I think another funny random little thing here, but you know, who knows if this plot point would have been thought of to add in if they hadn't put that sequence in that Superman episode. Mr. Tucker hadn't boarded the shot of sort of the terror that Hamilton experiences in that scene.
So great. You know, that's whether that was intentional as, hey, we're going to have a storyline later where that comes into play, or just like hey, this artistically makes a lot of sense. The fact that cohesively worked, and that Dwayne McDuffie was able to, he was so great with the continuity and making callbacks, making sure that things lined up, and making sure, okay, we're going to take this bit and we're going to call back to this, but also use it now and not make it, we'll make it so that it rewards the people that have been with us for so long, but also not make it so out there where it alienates people that maybe don't know what we're talking about. Man, he was a master at that. It's just,
yeah. Absolutely.
So
absolutely. But yes, as you said, he points out that Superman sort of quite literally put the fear of God in him in that moment. And that's sort of when he decided that he would do what he could to assist humanity. And in case it isn't clear, they once again spell out, Superman realizes, we're going to have to talk about this a lot in voice acting too, but Superman makes the connection that this mysterious Supergirl clone, which had shown up in Fearful Symmetry, was obviously the work of Professor Hamilton, and that he had violated her trust as well as his. To which Hamilton, you know, who violated whose trust first? You know, the chicken or the egg is what he says. But so Superman sort of kind of doesn't have anything else to say as he sort of storms out of the room, and we see once again that Hamilton was putting on a brave face, but he was he wasn't quite sure how that conversation was going to end. And as we move forward, Superman and Huntress are able to find the room where the question is being tortured, and after taking out the good doctor and Superman having to talk Huntress down to just knocking him out instead of knocking him out and shooting him with the crossbow. As they begin to leave and Superman's trying to figure out sort of the logistics of how they get out, we see that Captain Atom arrives. Chubb's Captain Atom.
Lean on me. We're getting out of here.
Secret messages encoded in amino acid chains in carb-free breakfast bars.
Come on, baby doll. It's all right.
It's gonna be a little rough. I'll take the guards, you get ready to move him.
That won't be necessary, Superman.
Good to see you, Captain. Cover our flank.
I'm afraid you misunderstand. I'm speaking as an officer of the United States Air Force.
Bad time to grow a sense of humor, Cap.
No joke, ma'am. I'm currently assigned to General Eiling's Special Projects Unit. My orders are to prevent you from taking question out of this facility. So how's this gonna go down?
At first, they're glad to see him, and they tell him to watch their back, but he makes it very clear very quickly that he is speaking to them as an officer of the United States Air Force, and that he is working with General Eiling in Cadmus, and that his orders are to stop the question from leaving this facility. And that is where we don't actually get it on the screen, but that is our to be continued moment as this episode wraps up for this week here, Cal. And as we can get towards our scores here, I mean, my gosh, where do we start? like, where do you start with an episode like this? I mean, we talked about a lot of the overarching themes of what the whole Cadmus arc were about last week in our episode when we covered Clash. But again, pointing out, I think one of the interesting things here, and something that I think, again, this is a bipartisan event that we see in our real world, where we will look at the actions of some of the most terrifying, horrible people that have ever lived, and we will say never again, and we'll never do that. But then if a government, a powerful person takes those same steps that we once decried, we'll say, well, we had a reason to do it. We had a good reason to do it. We maybe stepped over the line, but we did it in the best interest of the American people, the government, whoever, the country, whatever, the world. Like there's always the way that, the road to where we, the Justice Lords, an authoritarian fascist world is often paved by the quote unquote good guys making, little moral compromises to their actions, and how the question just sort of lays all of this out in that confrontation with Superman. And it really just goes again to walking this line of where we know Superman is a good guy, but he's having it thrown at him that, hey, he is maybe stepping over some lines. He is making decisions that maybe he shouldn't be doing, or at the very least shouldn't be unilaterally making these decisions by himself.
Well, and also equally relatable, despite the fact that in this moment in time, Superman is clear-headed, looking to make good decisions, has the best interests of the world or whoever at heart in the choices that he's making. You cannot deny the fact that his power, when corrupted or has been corrupted in the past, and there have been negative consequences that have led to people saying, you know what? I don't know if I trust this guy anymore to make those decisions, because I remember when this happened, which is also equally bipartisanly relatable to whoever is in power. You say, oh yeah, you want to make this decision? Well, what about when you said this was going to happen and that bad thing happened instead? Or we're going to make this choice,
right?
And now it's led to all these terrible consequences. It's a little, I mean, some of it is Monday morning quarterbacking, you could say, but a lot of it is, hey, let's look at what has happened based on these choices that you made in the past, and we're going to look at your track record, and you kind of have one chance to get things right. And if you don't, we're going to start questioning everything that comes after this, and we're going to point to that one thing that you messed up as a good reason why we should.
Right. And I think, like, well, what you mentioned there is, it's like as they talk about in this episode, it may not even be Superman of his own volition wreaking havoc and destroying the world, theoretically. That's also on the table there, which is, again, if you apply that to the real world, where a certain law passed, a certain foreign policy decision is made, military strategies, and you go, okay, you're the good guy implementing this. But, as Lois says, you have a giant laser.
Right.
And I mean, not to spoil it, but that really comes back to bite them in a couple episodes here. Like the idea of it's even, okay, well, the good guys are in control of it right now, and therefore it's good. Okay, but what if somebody else comes along and and has access to these exact same tools and implements them a little bit differently? This could be chaos. So yeah, there's a lot to this, I think, in the way that this is really like the trial of the trial of the soul. What do they call it? The something of the soul for Superman over these couple of episodes we've reviewed the last few weeks, where again, at the heart, we know at his heart that Superman is a good person, and he's not making these decisions because he wants to seize power and rule the world. But that again is the point of when the question takes him to, okay, you've already made these concessions that are just like what the Justice Lords did. What if the unthinkable happens? What if your worst enemy controls the most powerful government in the world? Right? Are you gonna be able to stick to these principles? And if Luthor becomes the government, like, I think it's just a fascinating look, and it reminded me in an episode, of course, A Better World, parts 1 and 2, also written by Dwayne McDuffie. The moment at the end of that second part where the Justice Lord Superman is fighting the Flash and he grabs a hold of him, Flash says something to the effect of, I must be the last piece of your conscience that you'll still listen to, or something like that. And Superman kind of looks around, or like kind of thinks to himself and says something to the effect of, I've done a lot of things I thought I'd never do. One more won't hurt. Right. And it's like, and you can say, oh, that's lazy. It's a slippery slope argument or whatever, when that's made in real world politics. But it is, where, again, there's not, generally, we don't jump to, globally, we don't jump to the worst case scenario right away. Right. We gradually slide there over the years, and not just in America, in many other countries. Like, like I said, there's a lot to unpack here, and looking at it through this superhero lens, I think what's amazing about this episode is, unlike, say, last week's, where we still had, that great, superhero punch up at the end, at the end of the episode. Other than this opening sequence, we're pretty light on like serious action here. other than the Question fighting, or the Question Huntress fighting some goons, and then the Question trying to strangle Lex with his tie and getting beat up. Like, it is very much this is a very like story heavy, story focused, dialogue focused episode, and to still have it be as interesting and captivating as it is, I think gives a lot of credit. We'll certainly, again, we'll talk about visuals and voice acting and music in a minute, but just such a credit to, as you said, Mr. McDuffie, as a writer, for crafting a story with a superhero story with this little punching that it's still so engrossing and so interesting, and plays off of all of these themes and moments from not only this series but previous series in the DCAU as well. Like, it's just incredible.
Yeah, I think the thing that accurately communicates just how great this episode is for me, or at least the impression it left on me, was I've seen this episode probably a dozen times. It's one of my favorite episodes. Seen it a lot, watched it a lot. Hadn't seen it in quite some time, but used to watch it pretty regularly. It was in the rotation, pretty heavy rotation. Watching it before we did the review, I was on the edge of my seat for the majority of it. I got goosebumps multiple times. And it's just so gripping. The switch between the Question, who's having this mental breakdown, and the weight of the idea that it's now his responsibility to make sure that the end of the world doesn't happen. He has to sacrifice himself in order to make sure that this doesn't happen for the good of humanity. Like, he doesn't care about the Justice League. He doesn't care about, the reputation, Superman's reputation. He doesn't care. He literally wants to prevent this war between the Justice League and the government. He's got to save the planet. And his idea is, all right, if I got to get, go to prison to do so, then by golly, I'm going to do it. And so seeing his whole arc through the story, getting more and more disheveled to the point where he's captured and tortured over this, but he's still like holding to his sticking to his guns, I guess, and refusing to give up what he knows. Like any typical hero in a movie would, a good hero in a movie would. And then you have this sort of the background is Superman still kind of chewing on this idea that the love of his life has broken to him in the beginning here, that, hey, this is getting kind of serious. People are really taking a look. You really need to think about the power that you have, what it means, how you use it. And then this interaction that he ends up having with Professor Hamilton over this huge incident that occurred. He's reminded again for the second time within, I think the timeline here for this episode is like a couple weeks or something like that, based on days that passed. But in a couple of weeks' time, reminded again of this legacy situation where he turned on Earth. So there's just multiple layers to it. We talked about it last week, but this is done in such a different way, where you don't have the superhero heavy action beats that we had last week, but it's still so effective. It's still so interesting. It's still so entertaining. It's a piece of dramatic excellence. And I just love this episode so much.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, I think a lot about what he says to Lex when he's sort of explaining. And he says, it's funny because you mentioned that like his first goal absolutely is, this is the only way to prevent this world-ending event, is if I kill Luthor so Superman can't. But he mentions like the League will survive, because obviously he's in the Justice League. Like, he believes, to an extent at least, he believes in this concept. Sure. He believes that perhaps at least initially it was set up by people with good intentions. And he says, Superman's legacy will be intact. And he talks about that, and how he's, he'll sort of take the brunt of it. And you can kind of flip that if you want to look at it uncharitably, of how, generally speaking, the most rich and powerful and influential people who do bad things, not naming names, but they're never really the ones that suffer the consequences, right? Surely. There's generally a fall guy. And so there's question offering himself up for, yes, to save the world, but also to be the fall guy so that the Justice League and Superman can continue on their, at least what he believes is, the broad strokes of which are a sort of righteous mission that he's willing to take on that and ruin his own legacy and ruin his own life to, in his mind, save the world and protect the Justice League from sort of further scrutiny or from further mistrust from the government. Like, there's so many, as you said, so many layers to this that are fantastic to talk about. I think, and we'll talk about it more when next we cover Justice League Unlimited, when we see the next part of this. Probably talk more about the Captain Atom thing here, but just the idea of a guy, and we saw that going back to the pilot episode of Justice League Unlimited, of how he's this very military, by the book, by the numbers, sir, yes, sir guy, and how he's grown into a hero in every sense of the word as the superhero, and the way that Cadmus takes that original, for lack of a better term, I don't mean programming in the sense that he was brainwashed, but his sense of duty, his moral compass, his wanting to protect and serve and defend, his country that he tried so hard to, and that ultimately he gave up his regular life for, to be part of this Captain Atom experiment, and how they take that and use it against him, to then where we leave this episode with him standing there with glowing red hands, willing to fight Superman to protect this government facility and not let them take this man they're holding hostage, his teammate in the Justice League. He's willing to fight Superman to stop to prevent him from them getting this hostage out of here. Like the way that his own loyalty and the way that, you know, a good soldier's you know, well-meaning morals can be corrupted by you know, a charismatic leader from time to time. I think there's just so many incredible layers all packed into this 22-minute superhero cartoon. So for all those reasons, probably not surprisingly, I don't feel like I had a choice but to give this a perfect 10 out of 10 for my plot score.
Yep, I'm with you right there. You know, I think the fact that this episode doesn't have action or a lot of action might be seen as a detriment if you're in other cases, in other episodes, if the story wasn't strong enough to fill in the gaps, so to speak. But because the story is so rich, so layered, and so integral to the entire episode, I think if you had added action anywhere else in this episode, it probably would have felt a little forced. So I think the idea that, hey, we're going to have this episode that's dialogue heavy, story heavy, the action is going to be tuned down a little bit. We'll have a little bit here, a little bit there, just so, you know, we can keep the entertainment up. But you're really going to have to pay attention to this episode. And this is really an episode that we are going to reward those that have been watching for a long time by pulling some of these threads in here. So, yeah, 10 out of 10 for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a masterpiece. And again, as we talked about last week, this is why this whole story arc is remembered so fondly, is how, again, you can kind of you know, you can get this if you're a kid, but when you come back to this a little bit older and see some of the added layers to this and why this Lex's and Cadmus's is working so well. I think it was quite a bit of fun to come back to it this week. And from our plot section, we will move over to visuals and animation, Cal. Once again, this episode was directed by Dan Reba with Dong Wu Animation covering that side of things. What stuck out to you this week? As we said, not a heavy action week, but so that means a lot of kind of smaller conversations and animating things like body language. Oh, and by the way, our main character for this episode doesn't have a face. So a tall task, to say the least, for our visuals department this week.
Yeah, I will say I think this is the animation, the drawings on this one, or the style. I think there's like very similar to the way that Batman the Animated Series we've talked about, where there's the square jaw Batman, there's the longer nose Batman. Mm-hmm. I feel like with Justice League Unlimited, you have the more square, true to the model versions, and then you have the little bit more angular and like defined muscular versions of the characters. I think we've talked about that a little bit. So I think there's like a little bit of a mix, I think, for this episode, but I think mostly everybody looked to be on model for the duration of the episode. As you mentioned, there not a ton of action, but the opening scene kicking things off with the Mantis versus Captain Atom and Superman fight, it is pretty destructive for a battle. Superman thrown through some cars, as you mentioned. We eventually wind up in a subway station, which, by the way, I believe the DCAU wiki mentioned that there's a Easter egg for that, as well as it's the Plastino Street Station, which is an homage to Al Plastino, the Silver Age Superman comic artist. So that was it's a neat little Easter egg that they decided to include there. But yeah, we talked about Superman's picnic and his choice of food. Thought that was pretty funny. That didn't know where to put that one. We already discussed it, but it was in my visual mention also. I also like the idea. Honestly, like I thought that the animation of Superman flying Lois to the top of the bridge, he flies past some birds. We get a nice sunset that's occurring in the background. I thought that scene was done, even though it's really quick. It's a quick little sequence. I thought visually it was pretty interesting. You mentioned the fact that the main character doesn't have a face, so that means that a lot of the emoting is going to have to be done through the voice acting, which we'll talk about in just a little bit here. But I did appreciate the question's descent into madness is sort of documented with a couple of different things. We see his tie becoming once he's completely kind of gone off and seen this video, and he's days deep into his analysis of the information that they hacked into and received from Cadmus. He's got the tie undone, and he's sitting there. He's still wearing his hat, but after he's seen the video, we cut back to him and he begins the pacing around the room. His hair gets real disheveled. And so really communicating that like descent into madness. He's, punching his clipboard or his cork board on the wall. So really emoting through both his the physical actions that you can see and not through his facial features. And as we mentioned, the voice acting, but then the torture scene is brutal too, because again, you can't, his face isn't what's emoting the pain and the anguish that he's in. It's his body is sort of convulsing. We mentioned the hematomas all over the body, and as the doctor continues to turn up this machine that's electrifying him or electrocuting him, his body convulses and sort of lurches forward, and we get his hair going crazy, and then it kind of collapses back down, and then he turns the machine back on again and he lurches forward. And so there's a lot of violence in that as well. I did like the Huntress versus both the security guard she fights at the beginning. I love that that's kind of happening. It's kind of in the forefront of the scene, but a lot of the action is happening kind of passing front and in front of you. So you see the question kind of there at the computer, and you see the action kind of passing back and forth behind him. And then they cut to kind of behind the question, and you see the action happening in and out of frame. And then later on, the same thing sort of happens again as she's taking on these bad guys, or the Cadmus agents in the Cadmus in the Cadmus lab. And so we see a lot of the action happening off screen as Superman is walking away. So she starts kicking some ass, and then as he's coming back to greet her, she's kind of finishing things up. So I thought that was pretty interesting also. But yeah, I think because we're light on action, there wasn't a ton as far as the action beats to consider. I think a lot of it is conveyed, as you mentioned, sort of in Superman's emotion, the way that they drew his face, both in the concern that he has in the conversation with Lois, and then later on in the conversation with Professor Hamilton, especially when Professor Hamilton kind of hits him with that last like chicken or egg comment. They cut back to him, and he's just kind of, you can see that he's angry, but also hurt and just disappointed and just kind of fed up, and walks away. I also loved when the question and Superman are having their conversation in the Watchtower, and Superman puts his hand, the question turns his back to him to walk away. Superman puts his hand on his shoulder, and the question sort of jumps in a very, is he going to attack me? What's going on? And Superman's face is one of like shock, like the fact that this guy would be scared of him, or, afraid that something is going to happen to him. Of course, this is a direct result of having just seen what appears to be this Superman murdering the president of the United States on video. Right. So he's probably suffering some PTSD from that. But Superman's look of just horror, of the fact that he is striking fear into this poor, this poor conspiracy theorist, was done really well too. So I didn't have a lot that was like, man, that was a great shot, or man, that was some great action, because it is so dialogue and action heavy. But I did think mostly everything was strong. I think the torture scene is probably the most brutal of, probably, is it the only torture? I don't know how many torture scenes we get in the DCAU, but that's a brutal one. It kind of ranks up there with Superman getting shocked by or hit with the Omega beams and really paraded around in Metropolis is one of those. It's like, this is very uncomfortable. So I went with an 8 out of 10 for animation and visuals.
Yeah, I went with the exact same score, actually, 8 out of 10. for my visuals and animation score as well. Can't add a lot to what you just said. I think you covered it pretty well there. I think just some of the little minor minutia of the episode, like just as you mentioned already, like the the disheveled hair and the loosened tie. The question has he's also kind of like slumped over a little bit more as the episode goes. As they mentioned, he hasn't like slept or showered for days, and
his fedora also keeps like getting more droopy,
yes.
like in his face.
And I think that's fantastic. And just that opening moment when he tells Superman that he knows about the Justice Lord Superman killing the president, and we just cut to this kind of close up of Superman's face, and then we kind of pan down to his hand, and he just crunches the chair. Like he just like grabs hold of the chair, and he squeezes so tightly that he almost crumples it like it's paper, which is a nice, just a nice little bit there that we see. I think is very good. I like seeing the inner workings of this Cadmus facility a little bit more. I think that's fun. I thought the moment where all the guys are lined up with their guns ready to shoot as Superman and the Huntress bust in is that feels very opening of A New Hope to me, with the guys waiting to fight Darth Vader and the stormtroopers. So
that's good. Yeah.
Whether intentional or not, I appreciated that. And then I like the brutality of that first fight that Huntress is having with the security guards, while Question is trying to hack the information. She's like busting chairs over people and all this. Like Huntress really fights dirty. and he seems, I think there's a part where she like shoves the rifle into one of the guys' face in the later fight as well. So the brief fisticuffs that fantastic as well. But yes, no small task when it's such a dialogue heavy episode, and as we've said, your main character doesn't have a face. So a very strong 8 out of 10 for both of us there. And from there, Cal, we will move on to our third category, which is of course music. Once again, this week we have all three of our dynamic music partners to thank for the music there. And I'll just say off the bat, there's really only a couple of moments where I noticed it. I would say in that scene with Question and Superman, it's just like this one like held kind of shrill, it almost feels like a horror movie.
Absolutely.
Where the dialogue is escalating as the Question gets more and more kind of accusatory towards him, and then it just kind of keeps coming out with this very shrill note as it keeps going, and all the way where it kind of it dissipates a little bit, but then Superman reaches out to touch him, and then it comes back up a little bit more there, and then I thought also the kind of on a similar note when Lex and Question have their confrontation. It's not like a dramatic over the top. We don't get like the wailing guitars or something you might expect from a JLU score here. It's very much sort of synthesizer and kept very simple for the most part. But I think those, again, with an episode that's so dialogue heavy, it's maybe not a surprise that the music kind of hangs in the background a little bit more this week.
Yeah. I will say that I don't think that there's an identifiable piece that really stands out as like, oh, this is a heroic superhero theme that we have here. It is very much mood setting and scene setting music. But the scene where the Question is watching the video of Superman killing Luthor, or the Justice Lord Superman killing Luthor, the music is just super eerie. Like it just plays, as you mentioned, like it's very kind of like shrill, and then it kind of escalates, and then once he sees the footage, it begins to drop and becomes like a little sinister to it. It's just, man, it's really, really, really strong. It's part of, I think, some of the goosebumps that I got in watching this episode were certainly enhanced through the musical accompaniment, because it very much like a musical score for a Hollywood film. The score is really designed here just to kind of make you feel whatever a similar emotion that the character is feeling. And that scene with the Question sort of descending into, as I've mentioned, descending into madness, as he then faces this idea of, my goodness, this isn't an alternate dimension. This is a time loop. This is our doom. We're gonna the world's going to end here soon. I loved that. I thought that was really, really strong. I thought that the music also, during the Cadmus breach, as they kind of break in, there's some action beats that play through that fight. Also the initial battle between Superman and these Cadmus guards, and then when Huntress takes over. And then the piano, there's actually piano that plays as Question is revealing his plan to kill Luthor to Luthor, and it's very subtle. It's in the background, and it's as he's taking his tie off and begins to kind of like pull it taut, like he's gonna strangle him with it. This piano sort of builds and crescendos, and that's when we get the reveal that actually the tables are going to turn here. Luthor's going to hand out some violence, actually. So yeah, there's some good pieces here. I thought the music was really strong, because of it. It didn't stand out as like a, hey, this is a hummable, memorable piece of music, as we've pointed out before, but because of the emotion that I felt like it drew out of me with these scenes, I gave it a very strong 9 out of 10.
Wow. Yeah. I went a little bit lower. I went 7 out of 10 for my score. But I do agree the piano that's brought in that scene with Question and Luthor is fantastic. And as they kind of go to break there, and then they come back, and we see like the vision that the Question is having with the, we didn't
talk about that.
I was going to say, I don't know if we mentioned that in visuals, but it's very, Luthor being sworn in, the Flash being, disheveled and beaten up, being brought to him by 2 soldiers as Luthor cocks a shotgun, all while Old Glory, the American flag, is waving in the background. And then this shot of Superman in black and white, but then his eyes glow red. It's fantastic. I don't know how we forgot to mention that in visuals.
Yeah, that one's really, really strong too. That was a great sequence there, and again, really disturbing.
Absolutely. And then we from there it kind of goes into this Armageddon scenario where the White House blows up, and then you sort of zoom out and you see these giant explosions happening all over the world. And yeah, the music in that sequence as well, strong. Another high score from Cal, and that will move us on to our final category, which is of course our voice acting category. And not a huge cast to talk about, but this is one that's I think got an obvious star that we'll save for last, but we'll kind of quickly touch on some of the other voice actors. We have returning to the show, we have J.K. Simmons as General Eiling briefly. Also briefly have CCH Pounder as Amanda Waller. We have Chris Cox returning as Captain Atom. And then of course we have Dana Delaney briefly as Lois, which is always great to have her there. And I think it's funny because Superman's kind of being hit over the head with the mistrust that people feel for him in this episode, but to have it kind of open with the softest touch version of this news he gets is from the woman he loves. And so having Lois be the one to kind of put him on this path of like, hey, you really need to start thinking about what you're doing and how this looks to everyone. I think I love the dialogue. And obviously this is not the same Superman that Miss Delaney played off of in the previous series. So she and George Newbern, I think, showing some great chemistry despite not having worked together nearly as much.
Yeah, it didn't even dawn on me. It didn't even dawn on me that, of course, we didn't get as many interactions there. But yeah, I think that's a credit to their ability to interact in ways that make it feel like the same 2 characters we had when Tim Daly was doing Superman. So yeah, it's always great to have Dana Delaney. She's an incredible voice actress, and certainly in the running for a top 10, if not top 5 DCEU voice actress of all time.
Absolutely. And elsewhere, we have in a pretty meaty role here. We do have Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor. He's not a huge part of the episode, except that he's the linchpin for the whole scenario. And as he sort of slowly and meticulously reveals to the Question that in fact he doesn't want to be the president. He has no interest. In fact, he's sort of almost laughing. He's so sort of amused by the situation as he's tearing into the question physically, and also just calling him like, yeah, you're this ultimate conspiracy guy who connects all the threads that no one else can see, and you're too stupid, and you're still too blind to see that I'm just doing this to mess with Superman.
President? Foolish, faceless man. My campaign is a farce, a small part of a much grander scheme. President. Do you know how much power I'd have to give up to be president? That's right, conspiracy buff. I spent $75 million on a fake presidential campaign. All just to tick Superman off. Now, about those files you stole from me.
Like it's a really great. It's only it's probably the scene's probably 90 seconds. Like it's not like it's a giant monologue, but just the way he's just amusing himself while he's beating up the question and telling him, I just love that whole sequence with him is fantastic. I mean, not surprising. It's not a headline on our show to say that Clancy Brown is a great actor, but especially great. Like this would be like if you're asking me off the top of my head to name like his best scenes. I think this is like a top 10er.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's good because he does kind of start off at this kind of bemused kind of, oh my goodness, I have to entertain this conspiracy theorist here that showed up in my office. And then as he's sort of discovering that whatever is going on with him, that he now has this newfound strength and youth about him, that he's kind of reveling in it, and the idea that he's able to sort of not only overpower, but really decimate this person that was there to try and kill him or had thoughts of killing him. So he does kind of ride that wave pretty well, I'd say. Again, unsurprisingly, as we've talked about numerous times here, Mr. Brown just the bee's knees when it comes to this stuff.
Absolutely. It's like I said, great single scene performance for him in this episode. And somebody else that I have perhaps not been kind to in the past JLU reviews, that being Mr. Robert Foxworth, allegedly playing Professor Emil Hamilton, though, as we've said, we have our suspicions over to his true identity. But again, him playing off of George Newbern as Superman in this episode, and getting to the heart of how this, again, if we've talked about it in the past when we review Superman, like Hamilton is like, other than maybe Lois and Jimmy, there's really no other like more regularly appearing supporting character in that series than Professor Hamilton. And so to find out that he had turned state's evidence, so to speak, and had been helping Superman's enemies the whole time, and not just to hurt Superman, but actually hurt Kara and hurt Supergirl as well. So it's like it's doubly personal, this confrontation they have. But as you said, the way he lays it all out, you kind of have this moment where Superman doesn't have anything else to say, because he's laid out his case, and he's made it clear that he's not going to be moved from this feeling and this opinion that the Justice League are dangerous. Superman himself is dangerous, and the world needs a Cadmus to protect them from people like Superman. And it's a very good performance by Mr. Foxworth. So credit where it's due, even if I remain suspicious as to the true identity of the character he's playing.
Yeah, I do think it would have been interesting to hear the original voice actor Victor Brandt do these lines, to hear just because he very much was in Superman the animated series sort of the the Alfred of that show. Like, for lack of a better term, he was just, not that he had the quips and the sarcasm, but just he was a calming presence and somebody to play off of, like the intelligence for Superman to play off of, and the voice of reason, and an ally, certainly, as you mentioned, one of Superman's closest allies. So I do think it would have been interesting to hear this darker sort of villainous turn for this character through that more calming, respectable voice that Mr. Brandt had. But I think Mr. Foxworth does a solid job in communicating his sort of, I mean, he's sort of kind of getting back at Superman. It's sort of that sweet revenge, after this. And he sort of enjoys kind of sharing this, at least in the moment. He has to put on this face like, he's this big tough guy, in front of Superman. So some of it, I imagine, is an act, but also some of it truly is that idea that, hey, I'm getting back at you. Like, you hurt me, I'm hurting you back, and I'm not sorry about it. So I think Mr. Foxworth, for what he was asked to do in this episode, he does a solid job.
Agreed. And then getting towards our main actors for the episode, we of course have Amy Acker returning as the Huntress, and we already kind of mentioned this in plot, but I really, really enjoyed her in this episode. Like, she doesn't have as much to do as George Newbern, or as we'll talk Combs, but interacting with the Question and then interacting with Superman, and her kind of just how unapologetic she is about it, but how also there's a little bit of pride, because there's the moment where she's like, well, you being such a Boy Scout is why I quit the Justice League, and Superman gets to throw it back. It's like, actually, I'm pretty sure you were fired.
Oh no. I'll find you, baby.
Not here, you won't. They wouldn't have bothered to dump his comlink unless they took him alive.
It has to be Cadmus. But if they've got him, we'll never find him.
Sure we will. We've been keeping tabs on Cadmus for months. We know exactly where they are.
And you didn't do anything?
The Justice League plays by the rules. We'll move when we have solid evidence, not before. And we'll move within the limits of the law.
That's why I quit.
The way I remember it, you were fired. But you may have a point this time. So you and I will do this together. And we're doing it off the books.
But I think Miss Acker as the Huntress in this episode is really, really strong as well. And like the moment where she's digging through the garbage at the dump because she thinks the Question's buried there, or the moment at the end when she's when he's resting on her shoulder and she's trying to kind of keep him conscious, or like there's just, and even like we said, some of the kind of the funnier, quirkier dialogue where she's trying to get him to be romantic and he's just so single-minded and clueless, so to speak. I think like she's very strong in this episode. I really enjoyed her performance.
Yeah, she is good. I think the toughest thing, as you mentioned, she has to play off of Jeffrey Combs' Question, who is, well, as we'll talk about in a moment here, is just fantastic, but is certainly one style of voice acting. And then you have George Newbern, who she plays off of for the rest of the episode, and he's very much a very different, like cool, calm, collected, as we talked about, even in these sort of heightened Cadmus arc stories where he is required to show a little emotion. We talked about that last week, a little more emotion than some of the earlier episodes. He's one of the big two of the series. So I think she more than holds her own, and comes off like she has some pretty good chemistry. She, their back and forth sounds pretty natural. The idea that she's this prodigal daughter that has come back to the Justice League, but only to in order to find her lover that happens to also be involved there. It's pretty strong from Miss Acker throughout this entire episode. And as you mentioned, she gets to show a little bit of concern. She gets some good quips in there. with Superman and talking about her place in the Justice League, and then the concern with the question at the end, and finding him. So yeah, there's some good stuff from her, and I think this is a pretty strong outing from her as well.
Absolutely. And then we'll transition there to briefly touch on more on George Newbern's performance in this episode as Superman. Again, a lot for him to do, playing off of Dana Delaney as Lois Lane, playing off of the question, Jeffrey Combs, and as well as Amy Acker, and as mentioned, Robert Foxworth as Professor Hamilton. So a lot of different. Again, we've sort of talked about this, that Superman is really being put through the ringer emotionally last couple of episodes, and he it feels like he has this real kind of not manic energy, but this feeling of like I feel like I'm taking crazy pills guy, where he's like, why is everyone like pointing fingers at me? It's me. Like, I know, like, I'm not going to do this. Why are people so worried about this? Why are people helping these people do this to me, to the Justice League? Like he's just getting a little bit more exasperated as it goes. But then even little things, as we mentioned, like, when Huntress is like, well, we'll never find him if Cadmus has him, and he sort of just spells out, no, we've known exactly where they are for months. we just haven't gone after them because we don't have evidence yet, and so we're not going to. And again, playing back into the themes of the episode of we're the good guys and we don't do things this way, but we're gonna do things this way this time because I've decided, I, as the most powerful man in the world, have decided that it's okay for the good guys to play this way this time. And again, so just like the dichotomy of how he's so offended, when Lois compares him to Lex, he's so, he almost doesn't understand when the question accuses him, or suggests that he might take the same actions that the Justice Lord Superman did. Yet we see him sort of compromising his own morals and his own beliefs at every turn for this mission, or for what it calls for in this case. So so we see him kind of going through this, this real like dark night of the soul, so to speak, in this episode, to as he's saying one thing, speaking very authoritatively about, I won't let this happen. This will never happen because we're doing what we do in the best interest of the people. But also, yeah, why don't we just go tear into a government facility because we think the guys think they may have kidnapped somebody. Like,
yeah, I enjoyed his performance. I think in the same way that we talked about Miss Acker, because he has so many people to play off of, it's a lot to ask for somebody to come off authentically. I think his interaction with the question in the conference room is really, really, really strong. I really enjoyed that. I thought that and the sequence that he has with Lois at the beginning, I think, are the two high points. I also did like the brief encounter that he has at the end with Chris Cox's Captain Atom, where he kind of comes to the realization that they had a little bit of dialogue at the beginning as they're battling Mantis. We get some exposition about that, but then his sort of realization that the Captain Atom's not quite on their side at the end. I thought that was a fun interaction as well. So yeah, really, really good stuff from Mr. Newbern this week. Maybe unsurprisingly, as we again hand out some pretty strong accolades to him week after week, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. Just some really fantastic stuff. His side of that Professor Hamilton scene is really great because he has these very accusatory lines, again, dismissing like, oh, one little scare and you betray me like this, and yelling about how you violated Kara's trust and all of this stuff. Like, he's fantastic in this episode. But let's get to the main event here, Cal, and talk about, of course, the great Jeffrey Combs, the voice of the question, and Dr. Hurt, as it turns out. And he's torturing himself in this episode. But yeah, this is like the magnum opus question episode. He obviously appears in quite a few other episodes, as we've talked about, a more memorable and more lighthearted affair in Double Date, maybe your favorite episode of Justice League Unlimited. But again, just this portrait that is painted, and a lot of that, as we've said, has to come from Jeffrey Combs' voice, because his character does not have a face,
right?
As we keep saying, of this man who he's already, wound very tightly. He's already a little bit of a loon, and then it turns out, he's right. There is a quote unquote new world order. There is a secret, a secret government, group that's affecting these events, and also and then makes all of these connections, and sort of just this portrait of a man that was already kind of over the edge, just falling deeper into the abyss and getting more and more insane as the episode goes. And of course they sort of add to that in the plot, where they talk about how he hasn't slept or showered in days, and he's just running and spiraling and just out of control. And to see him from the start of the episode, when he's having those kind of quirky fun interactions with Miss Acker as actress, to the scene with Superman, to the scene with Lex, just slowly but surely, or the scene where he's viewing the footage of Superman killing Lex in the White House, like just the way he slowly, when he's just talking to himself and he's like punching his conspiracy clipboard and sort of monologuing about whether or not destiny can be changed and all of that. Just, he's got a lot to do in this episode. And my goodness, what a tour de force Mr. Combs puts on here.
Have you seen Amanda Waller's computer simulations?
Batman told me about them.
Did he tell you all the models predict that a war between the Justice League and the government will devastate the planet?
We would never fight the government.
Not even if Luthor was the government? Predestined. Flash will die. You will kill Luthor. Armageddon. Inevitable.
Yeah, you've covered a lot of it there. It's really, really, really strong. I think the ask of him to kind of communicate this, I love. We start at the beginning of of the episode as he's downloading the information, and it sounds very much like he did when we last left him. After he sees this video of Luthor being killed by this Superman, he immediately starts talking in like incomplete sentences. So like he just says phrases, but he isn't speaking in complete sentences. He just kind of speaks broken sentences over, like he keeps stopping short. And even when the Huntress comes in and starts asking him what's going on and why he hasn't showered and all this stuff, he still continues speaking in broken sentences. So he's used that dialogue, the way that he delivers it, to show that he's losing it. He has this information and he doesn't know what to do with it. It's so overwhelming to him. But then we cut to the next scene where he's actually confronting Superman, and he once again has that sort of cockiness. As you mentioned, he comes up and tells Superman he needs to talk about his White House weenie roast. And when they get into the conference room, he mocks Superman over the fact that, oh, this is original members only in this area. Is that what this is for? And so as he's sort of sharing this information and what he's seen, he slowly, in that scene, also begins to sort of lose it and become more and more unhinged, and what, like we said, when Superman touches him and he has to gasp and hold, can't believe it, and that he's terrified of this alien that might do him in the way that he just saw him do in the President Luthor. And then the dialogue between him and Clancy Brown, really, really incredible. That maybe some of the most iconic lines in this Cadmus story arc are delivered for him. A is A, Luthor is Luthor. That one, the line back in his apartment when he first sees it, and it's not the future, or not the alternate reality, it's a time loop. And then he kind of asks himself, but also sort of asking the universe or God or whoever he's speaking to, is the future immutable? Can destiny be changed? Will they allow it? And he's just sort of like just delivered so well. Mr. Combs is fantastic in this role this week. Again, very, very unsurprising. maybe if you've listened to this podcast, but I love his turn as the Question. Perfect casting, perfect delivery for these lines, and the way that he had to sort of share this emotion and be able to give it out. Even the torture scene as he's being tortured, and he's giving these conspiracy theories as the way that he answers. It's sort of this exasperated, like deep pain that he's going through, but he's sort of coughing out these different conspiracy theories. I absolutely love it. So yeah, it's for all those reasons, everybody this week knocked it out of the park. I didn't feel like I had a choice but to give it a perfect 10 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Same exact score for myself as well. There's not much left to say. There's just, I was thinking a lot about how, sometimes things are created inspired by something, and then that thing then inspires future versions of the original thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, I was thinking about how the Question was obviously, being created by Steve Ditko, who was a very weird cat,
mm-hmm.
Had very specific sort of, was a big Ayn Randian guy, and all that. And then that led to Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons creating the character of Rorschach for the Watchmen series, and how subsequent portrayals of the Question have kind of leaned more in on that. And I thought about, like, there's no way you can't do in a comic book. You can do the inner monologue. You can do Rorschach's journal, and
right.
a lot of what the Question says in this episode could have been, would just be in a thought balloon or in a little, bracket on the side of the page.
Mm-hmm.
But because this is a cartoon, one actor having to make it work where he is monologuing out loud to himself repeatedly and mumbling, and the way he works it, where either he's shouting it sort of almost defiantly and he's sort of yelling at the world, or even when he's leaving after speaking to Superman, he's kind of mumbling under his breath of inevitable Armageddon, time loop, Flash is killed, and the way it all works, even though again this would normally in a different medium this would be probably done differently, but to have him have to audibly say all of this stuff and have it still work without feeling like you're shoving exposition at, or you're like beating the audience over the head with, hey, this is how this character's feeling and thinking right now. Just a masterful performance. And again, it works perfectly because it's this unhinged Question character who was already a bit of a nutcase, and now you add in this grand conspiracy that he stumbled onto, and a bit of sleep deprivation and torture on top of it. And just a fantastic job by Mr. Combs. As always, a hats off to Andrea Romano as the voice and casting director for all of these series. Just a masterful choice to bring Mr. Combs in. And from there, Cal, I believe that will bring us to our final scores for this week. As tallying everything up, I have a final score of 35 out of 40.
Yeah, we differed this week just in two categories, but my categories were ranked just a little bit higher in those two that we did differ on. So, well, actually, no, we differed on one category, and that category was 2 points higher. So, correct myself on that one. However, regardless, I ended up 2 points higher than yours. I came in with a 37 out of 40 for this, meaning back-to-back weeks here with top picks. This one goes into our top picks selection here. So is there really any need to discuss rewatchability? I think this is another one, just like last week, where, this is important to the DCAU. It has plot threads, as we mentioned, that go as far back as Superman, the animated series, not just with Superman's pal, but with, of course, Legacy also. And it's very important to the rest of the Cadmus arc, the rest of the DCAU as a whole. And, there are elements that you could argue are still being played out today, even in the Justice League Infinity comics. So I'd say that, this is a rather important linchpin episode. So 2 thumbs up for me.
Absolutely, no question about it. It's a huge episode, and it's a literal cliffhanger, as we mentioned. So when next we cover Justice League Unlimited, we'll be picking up right where this episode left off. So an absolute must watch as we begin to wrap things up. Thank you everybody for listening. Whether you do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or of course on the Pod Tower YouTube channel. We do appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show, a free way to do that, you can subscribe to the podcast on whatever venue you choose to listen to it on. And if you're listening to it on an audio app, if it allows you to give us 5 stars and leave a review, that does help us out a lot. We'd appreciate that. You can also support us more directly monetarily. There are links down in the show notes to this very episode that will show you how to do that. You can head to dcaureview.com and head to our store, or there's also a donate button in the show notes where you can support us monetarily. We appreciate people who choose to do so. And Cal, as we begin to wrap up March here, I'll have to double check my calendar, but I believe next Saturday, as of the time of recording, if you're listening to this on its original air date, is in fact April the 1st.
It is. And you know what happened last year on April Fool's Day? Something really, really strange happened last year. The universe shifted, and we went from being in the old Detective Comics universe to one that looked a little bit different, with a lot of different heroes. One that may or may not be owned by Mickey Mouse. You know, I'm not sure quite what happened, but it feels like things are shifting again here as we look forward to our second annual April Fool's Day episode.
That is right, Cal, and we will be heading back to the 90s Marvel animated universe for 1 week only. And instead of a Spidey adventure this week, we'll actually be seeing one of the early Marvel animated crossover events, that being in the Incredible Hulk animated series episode Helping Hand, Iron Fist.
This episode, as we'll talk about next week, has a legendary place in both of our hearts, because it was one of the very few episodes of this show that we had on tape. But it is great because it includes, as the name would suggest, it includes a special appearance by Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. So we have a crossover with the Incredible Hulk. We get some Hulk busters happening here. General Ross is making an appearance. This is a
War Machine.
War Machine shows up. That's right. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun episode. It includes some voices that were recognizable from other Marvel shows. So can't wait to talk about all of that next week with you, Liam. It's going to be a very silly and fun April Fool's Day episode with you.
That's right. So face front, true believers, and we'll see you next week for our special April Fool's episode. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll see you next time on another episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.